Hello, everybody. Welcome to this last lecture. The topic is the role of research ethics committees in policymaking and in public debate. These are two issues that are highlighted in the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights as responsibilities ethics committees on different levels should take on, in addition to their other responsibilities. The main responsibility of research ethics committees are to evaluate research projects, to assess their scientific relevance and value, but first and foremost to assess how research participants will be treated, how they will be protected, and that is the primary responsibility of research ethics committees. But research ethics committees should also look into how they could contribute to policy making and to enhancing public debate. So let's now go to the last lecture of this week. Let's start with an operative definition of what public policy and policy making entails. And I draw on Article 1 of the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights because it contains an operative definition, and it sounds like this: regulations of different forms and formats pertaining to medicine, life sciences, and associated technologies as applied to human beings, taking into account their social, legal, and environmental dimensions. Furthermore, in Article 19 of the Declaration, there is an implicit differentiation between three types of policy making. First, formulation of recommendations. Second, preparation of guidelines. And third, foresight. Also, when it comes to relevant areas for policy making, the declaration informs us. For example, it highlights issues within the health and life sciences and associated technologies. For example, in Article 14, emphasis is put on access to quality health care and essential medicines, and Article 15 focused the attention on the sharing of benefits resulting from scientific research and its applications. Furthermore, in Article 16 and 17, areas in need of particular protection are highlighted, such as the environment and its biodiversity, the biosphere, as well as future generations. In addition, in Article 17, appropriate access and utilization of biological and genetic resources is emphasized, together with respect for traditional knowledge. Finally, in Article 21 on transnational practices, the Declaration put emphasis on the importance of states taking, I quote, appropriate measures both at the national and international levels to combat bioterrorism and illicit traffic in organs, tissues, samples, genetic resources, and genetic-related materials. And this is an area of particular importance and relevance for cost-poor countries. Why? Because these countries are some of the richest countries when it comes to biodiversity. And for this reason, it is so important also that these countries establish policies and legislations that protect them from researchers coming from abroad to exploit these extremely important and valuable resources. Together, the principles set out in Articles 3 to 17 in the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights show a normative roadmap aimed at providing guidance to bioethics committees in charge of developing sustainable guidelines and regulations and contributing to the making of public policies within the field. So, which are the relevant areas of policy making? For example, allocation of resources for healthcare needs and for science and technology development. Second, the gross inequality in health and healthcare between rich and poor classes within nations, as well as between affluent countries and poor and low-income countries, is an extremely important area for policy making. Third, the health status of women in poor and low-income countries. Fourth, problems pertaining to beginning and end of life, reproductive rights and technologies, and birth control and sexual rights. And fifth and last, the role of religious values and knowledge system in informing public policy making in bioethics. Because it is a fact of the world that in many countries in the South, religion plays a prominent role. Here are some key concepts important to consider with regard to public policies and policy making. First, policies come to expression in many different forms and formats, as law or set of laws, or as regulatory measures of some other kind, governing certain activities or issue areas. Second, the term public policy signals that the system of laws, regulatory measures, or courses of action in question are instituted and put into effect by a governmental entity or its representatives. Next, public policy making has public implications in the sense that it affects a greater variety of people and interests than do private decisions. Furthermore, it aims at solving problems within the areas affected by the policy making in ways that are at least partially effective as well as cost efficient. Let's then take a look at the policy process, at actors, at factors, and at forces. Important to consider is also the process, a term which alludes to the different actors, factors, and forces that might be at play in translating policy ideas into public policy regulations that are able to address problems evoking public concern and interest, be it sudden dramatic events as, for example, the catastrophe of September 11th in 2001, a dangerous epidemic such as the Ebola outbreak in 3 African countries a few years ago, or a spectacular scientific breakthrough as Dolly the Sheep, or, for example, a more recent spectacular scientific breakthrough, the introduction of here I have to cut. Or a more recent spectacular scientific breakthrough like the CRISPR methodology, which makes it possible to change parts and bits of our genomic foundation. Or a research scandal, for example, the spectacular scandal in stem cell research that was disclosed in Seoul, South Korea in 2006. Or be it problems brought to the fore through actions and activities performed by different advocacy and interest groups. Important to consider is also the context in which the policy process takes place, since policies do not develop in a vacuum, but in an environment of already existing policies and practices, different sectoral interests, ideologies, and perspectives regarding life or happiness that might represent obstacles to implementing new policies, generate side effects, or cause new policy problems necessary to tackle post hoc. Then let's move to the different stages or steps in the policy process. First, issue emergence and problem recognition. These are terms describing the first step of the policy-making process, in the sense that the social problem has to be recognized as a policy problem, that is, as a problem perceived in need of being dealt with through some kind of regulatory measures. Then the second step, agenda setting. This term is used to depict the second envisaged stage of the process, with agenda simply meaning the list of subjects or issues to which governmental authorities and institutions are paying some serious attention at any given time. In bringing problems to public attention and in the shaping and control of the problem agenda, actors outside government and their representative bodies often play an influential role, for example, through their expertise, through representing particular interest groups or affected parties, or simply through framing problems in ways that give rise to the maximum level of public attention. The third step, policy formulation. This stage in the process includes the establishment of clearly stated aims or objectives of the envisaged policy, as well as the formulation of alternatives for action to reach these objectives. As is the case with agenda setting, the shaping and formulating of policies often results from an interaction between governmental officials and their representatives and different social actors and organized interest groups, or policy networks, representing the wider society. Fourth step, policy implementation. This entails executing or putting into force a policy, and normally this is carried out by a public institution or organization. The policy implementation process consists of three core elements: specification of program details, including how the policy should be interpreted and how and by which agencies, organizations it should be executed. Allocation and distribution of resources, including distribution of budget and allocation of appropriate personnel to execute the policy. And third, how decisions of single cases pertaining to the policy should be carried out. Then to the fifth and last step in the policy process, evaluation of the process. Since policy making is aimed at some sort of problem solving, evaluation of the actual effects and outcomes, including possible side effects of the implemented policy, represents an integral part of the policy process. Let's then take a look at the role of different ethics committees and public policy making. Article 19 of the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights suggests the establishment of independent, multidisciplinary and pluralistic ethics committees at the appropriate level to provide advice, formulate policy recommendations, and contribute to the preparation of guidelines on issues within the scope of the declaration. So this three-parted emphasis on independency, multidisciplinarity and pluralism reflects a shared understanding among the UN member states of the need of creating forums for bioethical deliberation that is situated in the interface between health and life sciences and related technologies on the one hand, and the political community and the community at large on the other hand, to serve as facilitators of public debate and policy making in the field. The establishment of such public bioethics bodies may be seen as the result of several factors. First, the acknowledgement that ethical consciousness of individual scientists and physicians is not a sufficient safeguard to deal with the normative underpinnings and societal implications of clinical, scientific and technological developments. Second, challenges and controversies in medicine and in the life sciences and related technologies are increasingly perceived as a moral and societal rather than as merely scientific or technical disputes. Third, the resolution of such challenges and controversies requires not only the creation of multidisciplinary bodies, these bodies must in addition be able to reflect the value pluralism of the society at large. For this reason, such bodies should, for the fourth, be public bodies representing the prevailing moralities of different publics constituting the society at large. This signals that public ethics bodies, by their composition, by their multidisciplinary expertise, by the location and deliberative conduct, are considered particularly suited to identify and articulate prevailing views and values existing within pluralistic societies, and point to ways of fostering consensus about how to publicly deal with challenges and controversies in the health and life sciences and related technologies. And again, back to the areas and topics of relevance for policymaking. I have already showed you 2 or 3 slides on this, but let's repeat it again. These are the issues and topics mentioned in the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights: science and research policies, scientific and technological knowledge, capacity building facilities for research purposes, new diagnostic and therapeutic modalities or products stemming from research, preventive, diagnostic and therapeutic medical interventions, quality healthcare and essential medicines. All these areas are relevant for policymaking in every country in this world. Furthermore, adequate nutrition and water, living conditions and the environment, poverty and illiteracy, traffic in organs, tissues, samples, genetic resources and genetic related materials, bioterrorism, the environment, the biosphere and biodiversity. What is interesting is that there are some topics of high relevance for policymaking that are not mentioned in the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights. It is, for example, allocation of resources for healthcare needs, allocation of resources for science and technology development, biopiracy, the gross inequality in health and healthcare between rich and poor classes within nations, as well as between affluent countries and poor and low-income countries, the health status of women in poor and low-income countries, and problems pertaining to beginning and end of life, problems pertaining to birth control and sexual rights, reproductive rights and reproductive technologies, end-of-life decisions, abortion, terminal sedation, euthanasia, assisted suicide, and finally the role of religious values and knowledge system on public policy making. These are all areas of high relevance for policy making, but the reason why these areas are not mentioned in the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights relates to the problem of reaching consensus on these issues, because here policies in different countries differ dramatically. Then to factors, methods and procedures of how to do or how to make public policies within the field of ethics. The fact that Article 19 of the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights emphasizes independence as one of the defining features of an ethics committee makes clear that ethics committees are entitled, at least in theory, to propose their own agenda with regard to policy making. That is, to decide which bioethical problems should be recognized as problems potentially relevant for policy making. So the independence of the committee is so important when it comes to identifying, okay, which areas should we give priority when it comes to making public policies. In the process of identifying such problems, the Ethics Committee should make use of the inventory of policy issues alluded to in the declaration as a first step towards such an identification. It is, however, important that the committees, in their attempt at identifying relevant issues to address, at the same time contextualize their search so as to be able to establish an agenda in compliance with requested demands and perceived needs in their own constitutional, cultural, social and political settings. And here, certainly, countries will differ dramatically. To draft a public policy in Argentina or in Somalia is or can be dramatically different from drafting a public policy within the field of ethics in the United States or in Italy, or for that sake, Norway. So the importance when one develop a list of priority when it comes to public policy making, it is necessary to contextualize this search. In relation to the internal process of problem recognition and agenda setting, the members of an ethics committee may very well agree on the policy relevance of the problems identified or proposed, while at the same time they disagree with regard to which problems should be put first on the agenda, that is, which problems should be given highest priority. In order to solve such forms of disagreement, it is important that both a committee on the national level but also committees on other levels in their deliberation acts according to the multidisciplinary and pluralistic composition of the committee, so as to give due regard to the voice and views of each committee member. Second, taking multidisciplinarity and pluralism seriously implies that every voice should count the same, irrespective of committee members being situated differently in hierarchies and power structure outside the committee context. And that is, in a way, one of the beautiful things with an ethics committee. The way an ethics committee should deliberate is to give every member around the table the same freedom, possibility, and space to formulate their views and give expression to their views. But this is a challenge, in particular in countries with very strong hierarchies. For example, in the research ethics committee, the physician professor has a tendency to expect that he or she has a more right to voice their views than, for example, a nurse who is also member of the same committee. But in an ethics committee, every member counts the same, and every member should be given the same right to speak up, to voice their views. For pragmatical reasons, however, in order for the committee to be able to start its work, a decision has to be made with regard to which problems should be prioritized. Here it might be that the easiest way out is to vote and consequently give priority to the problem receiving most votes. Alternatively, the committee can decide to divide itself into several working groups and consequently proceed with more than one policy issue at the same time. Following the problem recognition and agenda setting comes the process of policy formulation. That is, the process of establishing the aims or objectives of the envisaged policy, as well as formulating alternative courses of action to reach these objectives. At this level of the policy process, it might be that the members of the committee will be able to agree on aims and objectives of the envisaged policy, as well as on the formulation of alternatives for action. But exactly because of its pluralistic composition, members will often disagree with regard to the underlying moral justifications of each action, as well as with regard to the moral reasons for favoring one alternative to other envisaged options. It is in dealing with such forms of disagreement that the ethical principle of egalitarian reciprocity is put to the test, because it is exactly at the level of moral deliberation and justification that genuine respect for the arguments and views of others might come to expression or fail to materialize. Every actual, or to say it in this way, here are some rules of play to maintain egalitarian reciprocity. Every actual and possible participant in the discourse must be treated as a free and equal individual in accordance with the following rules of play. First, that nobody who could make a relevant contribution may be excluded. Second, that all participants are afforded an equal opportunity to make contributions. Third, that the participants must mean what they say. Only truthful utterances are admissible. And fourth, that communication must be freed from external and internal compulsion, so that the yes-no stances that participants adopt on criticizable validity claims are motivated solely by the rational force of the better reasons. In addition to the rules of play mentioned in the previous slide, some substantive principles are needed as well to regulate this procedure, such as the principle of publicity, which means the deliberation must take place in public and the content of the reason must be understandable to all. Second, the principle of accountability, which regulates the agents to whom and by whom the reasons should be given. Third, the principle of deliberative inclusion, to safeguard wide expressive liberties such as freedom of religion. Fourth, the principle of the common good, implying that the policy must at least advance the interest of all. And finally, the principle of participation, so as to assure equal opportunity for all to have equal political influence. A second reason why collective moral deliberation is demanding is that participants in a deliberative team have a tendency to perceive their own values as being evident and innerly consistent without really having carried out a careful, in-depth analysis of their foundation and justifications. This normally happens only when somebody else challenges our value preferences, something which also indicates how important it is to expose one's own moral convictions and values to others. And to quote from a paper by Diego Gracia, it is only at this point that we can begin to think that people with other preferences can be at least as right as we are to defend ours, and that by that being aware of their motivations can be useful to us in order to be more aware of our options and wiser in our decisions. This is the only way in which we will be open to the reasons of others and capable of listening to them. This is the beginning of a true deliberation process. End of quote. Being aware of these pitfalls is, however, not sufficient to make moral deliberation in an ethics committee function in a sustainable way. What is needed in addition is a methodological framework that enables committee members to carry out the process of deliberation in a coherent and transparent way. A first possible step towards achieving this is to differentiate between different levels of deliberation, as for example between factual deliberation, that is deliberation about, okay, what are the facts related to this issue? And here it may also be useful to differentiate between naked facts, that is facts that everybody agrees on, and other morally relevant facts. Third, deliberation on values, that is, okay, which values are at stake here? And thirdly, deliberation about alternative courses of action. Finally comes the step of deliberation about alternative courses of action. The main challenge at this level is to avoid the tendency of reducing the alternatives for action to the logic of binary options, either or. This is, however, difficult in practice to avoid because we are prone to reduce all possible courses of action to two and only two, and to think of them as opposite and extreme. By deliberating in this way, one reduces, however, the space of possible actions to two radical opposites, while failing to work out the grey and seemingly invisible options in the space between the two extremes. To quote Aristotle, often the most prudent action to take is the action in the middle, in the grey zone between the two opposing extremes. Let's now move on to the second topic of this last lecture, research ethics committees and public debate. Also, in relation to public debate, the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights provide advice. In Article 18.3, for example, on decision-making and addressing bioethical issues. The declaration states, opportunities for informed, pluralistic public debate seeking the expression of all relevant opinions should be promoted. End of quote. Furthermore, in Article 19, Item D, it is stated that ethics committees should, I quote, foster debate, education and public awareness of and engagement in bioethics. Before we proceed to the debate issue, it is extremely important to differentiate between ethical arguments, ethical deliberation, ethical debate, and ethical dialogue. And here to quote is a quote from one of the early paper of Martha Craven Nussbaum. To be fully successful as arguments must be such as to change the heart. This phrase coins, I think, in a beautiful way that in moral or in argumentations and deliberations about moral issues, it is not sufficient that your arguments are logically consistent. It is not sufficient that they are consistent on the cognitive level. Ethical arguments must be of such a kind that it touches your heart, because ethical argumentations are not just purely logical cognitive argumentations. It is emotional arguments as well. The emotional dimension of moral deliberation is extremely important. Then a couple of slides on ethical deliberation, and again to quote from Diego Gracia's article, the method of ethical deliberation is as old as the discipline of ethics itself, but it was immediately forgotten. For centuries, or more correctly for millennia, it was thought that only some people, such as popes, priests, philosophers, physicians, and moralists, had a special capacity to know clearly and without any doubt what is right and wrong. They were, therefore, the moral leaders of societies. This entitled them to lead all the others, who should only respond through obedience. There were two different moral roles, the one of leadership and the other of obedience. Martinez states it in this way: ethics is not a procedure of demonstration, but dialogue and deliberation from human experience, where reason dwells, but not only reason. So here, what is important to emphasize is that when it comes to ethical deliberation, every human being is as competent as all other human beings. Whether you are a professor working in a store, driving the tractor, literate or illiterate, every human being possesses this capacity to make moral decisions. So to ethical debate. In debate, one looks for weaknesses in another position. In debate, one looks for glaring differences. Debate involves countering the other's position at the expense of the relationship. Debate calls for investing wholeheartedly one's own beliefs. Debate is oppositional and seeks to prove the other wrong. The goal of debate is winning, often only for a short-term advantage. In debate, one listens to find flaws and counter-arguments in the other debate partners. In debate defends assumptions as truth. Ethical deliberation, on the other hand, is different. In deliberation, one looks for strength in another position. Deliberation involves concern for others. Deliberation assumes that many people have pieces of an answer to a workable solution. In deliberation, one temporarily suspends one's own judgments for others' beliefs. Deliberation is collaborative and seeks common understanding. The goal of deliberation is common ground for action, which is the basis for consistent policy. In deliberation, one listens to understand and find meaning in agreement. Deliberation reveals assumptions for re-evaluation. Then to dialogue. Dialogue is a process that allows people, usually in small groups, to share their perspectives and experiences with one another about difficult issues we tend to just debate about or avoid entirely. Dialogue is not about judging, weighing or making decisions, but about understanding and learning. Dialogue lays the groundwork for the vital work of deliberation. The trust, mutual understanding and relationships that are built during dialogue allow for participants to deliberate more effectively and to make better decisions. Furthermore, deliberation is a closely related process with different emphasis. Deliberation emphasizes the use of logic and reasoning to make better decisions. Dialogue and deliberation are used for a variety of reasons: to resolve conflicts and bridge divides, to build understanding about complex issues, to foster innovative solutions to problems and launch action, and to reach agreement on or recommendations about policy decisions. Then to the role of ethics committees in relation to promoting public debate. And here are 4 key terms that are important to take into account: opportunities, informed debate, pluralistic debate, relevant opinions. The term opportunities is important because it for the first to provide a map of real and potential opportunities that deserves due consideration. Ethics committees should try to determine what opportunities represent real options for them to promote here and now, by what means, in what ways and to what extent. That is, what issues should we select when it comes to promoting public debate? This is a very delicate decision to make, and for this reason the term opportunity is very important. Second, informed debate. The debates that the committees should promote should be informed. This wording raises the important question about the role of factual information, such as scientific knowledge, evidence-based knowledge, cost-benefit analysis, etc., and what appropriate sharing of such knowledge entails in promoting awareness and public debate, versus the role and forms of information and information sharing pertaining to social class, cultural background, educational level of scientific literacy, religious upbringing, etc. Third, pluralistic debate. The kind of debates the committees should promote should be pluralistic in nature. This raises the question what safeguards need to be in place to make pluralistic public debates in bioethics possible, taking the composition of the committee and the contextual situation of each committee into account. Relevant opinions. Because of capacity reasons, it will seldom be possible for an ethics committee to include at the same time representatives from all the publics that might be affected by the issue up for debate. What will be possible, however, is to identify what public stands to gain or risk most from the debated issue, and thereby also identify what opinions are most relevant with regard to being expressed and publicly debated. Which are then the modes of promoting public awareness and debates? And this is the last slide of this last lecture. First, open committee meetings. Should the deliberation that different ethics committees and on different level, should these meetings be open to the public? Well, some suggest that that would promote transparency. Another way of promoting public awareness and debate is to organize public hearings and town hall meetings about controversial issues. These are fora where different stakeholders might be given the opportunity to voice their views and arguments. A third option is roundtable conferences. And the fourth option is lay people consensus conferences, scenario workshops and focus groups. Because the fascinating thing with issues of moral relevance is that when it comes to reflecting on the moral challenges pertaining to a new technological area, a new scientific breakthrough, every human being is entitled to have his or her voice. And for this reason, the mode of organizing lay people consensus conferences has proved to be a very efficient way of raising public awareness and stimulating public debate. Thanks for the attention. For almost 7 weeks, we have been together in this virtual room. Our hope is that you have benefited from this journey together into the different aspects of research ethics. Next week, you are going to work on your final project, and this course will end. But this is not the end in terms of ethics capacity building. This is just the end of the beginning, and we wish you good luck with your further journey into this fascinating field called ethics.